Waking up to an empty house, a cold letter confirmed my son and his wife had drained every account, even my grandson's college fund, after living with me for 18 months. They took my car, my medicine, everything. The world went silent, but my heart roared. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. I simply wiped my tears, knowing they hadn't seen the last of me. Like and share this story, and let me know where you're listening from. The silence was the first thing that struck Eleanor, sharp and unnatural. It wasn't the quiet peace of a Sunday morning, but an absence, a gaping void where familiar sounds should have been. Usually, by this hour, the rhythmic thud of Daniel's heavy boots would have echoed from the kitchen, followed by the soft clink of ceramic as he prepared his elaborate morning coffee. The rich aroma of freshly brewed dark roast would already be teasing her from her bed. But today, nothing. Only the distant chirping of birds from beyond her bedroom window broke the unnatural stillness. A prickle of unease stirred in her. She pushed aside the cashmere throw and swung her legs to the floor, the cool wood a small shock against her bare feet. Padding down the hallway, she noticed Daniel and Serena's bedroom door was ajar. A sliver of morning light, thin and hesitant, spilled into the hall. She pushed the door open wider. The room was empty. The bed, usually meticulously made by Serena, was a rumpled mess of tangled sheets and discarded pillows. Clothes, a pair of Serena's jeans, a forgotten shirt of Daniel's, lay haphazardly on the floor, as if tossed aside in a frantic rush. A suitcase was nowhere to be seen, nor were any of Serena's extensive collection of cosmetics. An icy dread began to coil in Eleanor's stomach. This wasn't just an early start. It felt like an abrupt departure. Her eyes scanned the room, then the hall, searching for some clue, some explanation. That's when she saw it. Propped against the lamp on her own nightstand, a crisp white envelope, stark against the dark wood. It was addressed simply, "Mom." Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The handwriting was Daniel's, precise and even, belying the chaos that was about to erupt in her life. She tore it open. The words swam before her eyes, blurring into an incomprehensible mess for a moment, before snapping into sharp, brutal focus. "Mom, Serena and I have decided to start fresh, somewhere new. We've taken what we need to build a life for our family. Our family." The phrase hung in the air, a cruel, invisible blade, severing her from the son she had raised alone, from the grandson she adored. It was a declaration, cold and absolute, that she was no longer part of their equation. The insinuation of "taken what we need" was like a sudden, sharp blow to the gut. What exactly did that mean? Her mind, still grappling with the sheer audacity of the letter, immediately leaped to the practical. Her bank accounts, the ones Daniel had helped her manage since her husband's passing. Her hands, clammy and cold, fumbled for her phone. She dialed the bank's customer service number, her voice a strained whisper when the automated menu finally allowed her to speak to a person. "Yes, I need to inquire about my accounts," she managed, her voice barely steady. Eleanor Vance, the polite, distant voice of the representative, asked for verification details. Eleanor provided them, her anxiety mounting with each passing second. A pause. A shuffling of keys. "Mrs. Vance, I show that all accounts under your name were closed yesterday afternoon," the representative stated, completely devoid of emotion. "Checking, savings, and the CD for Leo's college fund." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. "Closed? That can't be right. I didn't authorize that." According to our records, Mr. Daniel Vance, with a valid power of attorney signed 6 months ago, initiated the closure of all linked accounts, the representative explained. 6 months. The detail echoed in her head, a horrifying realization. This wasn't a sudden impulse, a moment of desperation. This was planned, meticulously, coldly planned. A power of attorney she vaguely remembered signing, trusting Daniel to handle her affairs after a minor health scare. She had never read the fine print, just blindly trusted her son. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea wash over her, She gripped the phone, her knuckles white. She looked around, her eyes wide with a new kind of panic. Her car, her reliable sedan, usually parked in the driveway, gone. Daniel's vintage Mustang, the one he had meticulously restored, also gone. And then, the truly terrifying thought. Her medications, the daily pills for her heart condition, for her blood pressure, all gone. Her purse, containing her wallet and house keys, was also conspicuously absent from its usual spot on the kitchen counter. The memories flooded back. Daniel and Serena, arriving on her doorstep 18 months ago, pleading for a temporary place to stay, while Daniel sorted out his new job, while Serena looked for work. 18 months of shared meals, shared laughter, promises of a fresh start. Promises that had been nothing but carefully constructed lies. They hadn't been building a new life. They had been systematically dismantling hers, using her home, her savings, her trust, as a launchpad for their own selfish escape. They had been funding their disappearance with her money. The phone rang again, startling her. It was Leo's school. "Mrs. Vance? We're calling to inquire if Leo's parents are running late. Pickup was 30 minutes ago, and we haven't heard from them." Eleanor's heart plummeted. Leo, her grandson, abandoned at school, and she, who would normally rush to his side, was stranded. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. They're not here. I can't. I don't have a car to pick him up." The shame burned her cheeks, hot and searing. An hour later, Leo arrived, his usually bright eyes wide and a little uncertain. Beside him stood Miss Davies, a kind-faced school counselor, her expression a careful mixture of concern and pity. Eleanor forced a wobbly smile, trying to project an air of normalcy she didn't feel, trying to shield Leo from the devastating truth that was about to engulf their lives. "Hi, sweetie," she managed, her voice impossibly light. "Everything's fine. Just a little mix-up." After Miss Davies had left, her parting words about contacting her if Eleanor needed anything hanging heavy in the air, Eleanor led Leo inside. Her eyes swept through the kitchen. The refrigerator, usually well-stocked, stood almost entirely empty. A single carton of milk, a half-eaten loaf of bread. They hadn't just taken the money and the cars, they had even stripped the kitchen, leaving bare shelves and a hollow echo. It was a final, petty insult, a clear message. "We took everything." Eleanor sank onto the sofa, the exhaustion, the shock, the profound sense of violation weighing her down. She buried her face in her hands, the forced smile fading, replaced by a torrent of tears. They weren't just tears for the lost money, for the shattered future, for the daunting uncertainty that stretched before her. They were tears for the son she had raised alone, pouring every ounce of her love and sacrifice into him after his father died. The son who had just, with a few cold words and a signature, obliterated her existence. How do you mourn someone who is still alive but has ceased to exist to you? How do you grieve a betrayal so absolute that it feels like a death? Yet there is no body, no funeral, only an empty house and a gaping wound in your soul? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, as Eleanor sat in the wreckage of her life, clutching the crumpled letter like a final, twisted testament. The first light of dawn was painting streaks of muted gray across the living room window when Eleanor stirred. Her neck was stiff, her back a knot of aching muscles, a testament to her night spent hunched in the rocking chair, a crumpled letter still clutched in her hand. For a fleeting moment, she was disoriented, a foggy confusion clinging to her as she tried to recall where she was, what had happened. Then, the brutal reality of yesterday slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Daniel, Serena, gone. Everything. A small, soft voice broke through the fog of her despair. "Grandma? Are you okay?" Eleanor blinked, her eyes gritty and sore, slowly focusing on the small figure standing before her. Leo. Her grandson. His hair was tousled from sleep, his pajamas slightly wrinkled, but his eyes, usually so full of childlike wonder, held a depth of concern that was far too mature for his years. "Leo, darling," she managed, her voice a raspy whisper. She tried to straighten up, wincing at the protest from her spine. "Yes, Grandma's fine. Just fell asleep in the chair. A lie. But what else could she say? How could she burden this innocent boy with the truth of their new, devastating reality? Her gaze fell on his expectant face, and the practicalities of their situation clawed at her. No car, no food. How would she feed him? How would she get him to school? The weight of responsibility, amplified by her utter helplessness, pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her vision blurred again, a fresh wave of panic threatening to engulf her. She had always prided herself on being strong, independent, capable. Now, she felt utterly stripped, vulnerable, and terrifyingly unprepared. Leo, however, seemed to sense her distress, or perhaps he was simply ready to speak a truth that had been gnawing at him. He shuffled his feet, his gaze fixed on the worn rug beneath them, then slowly looked up. His voice, usually so bright and full of questions, was hushed, almost a whisper. "Grandma, I know Mom and Dad aren't coming back." The words hung in the air, a shocking pronouncement. Eleanor stared at him, her heart clenching. She had tried so desperately to shield him, to pretend, even to herself, that this was just a temporary misunderstanding. But Leo, in his innocent wisdom, had already processed the unspeakable. "What makes you say that, sweet pea?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight, a lump forming in her throat. She knelt down, ignoring the stiffness in her knees, trying to meet his gaze at eye level, to show him she was truly listening. Leo hesitated, twisting the hem of his pajama top. "Sometimes," he began, his voice barely audible, "when they thought I was asleep, or watching TV really loud, Serena would say things. Bad things." His small brow furrowed, a shadow passing over his young face. "She said you were old and useless, Grandma, and that Dad needed to grow up and stop taking care of you." A sharp, almost physical pain pierced Eleanor's chest. The words were a venomous echo of the insults she herself had heard from Serena over the past year, veiled as jokes or concerned advice about her age. But to hear them spoken through Leo, knowing he had overheard them, amplified the cruelty tenfold. It wasn't just an insult, it was an attempt to poison her grandson's mind against her, to dehumanize her in their eyes. "But that's not true, Grandma," Leo quickly added, his voice gaining a touch of indignant firmness. He reached out a small hand and touched her arm. "You take care of us." A tiny spark, a flicker of warmth, ignited in Eleanor's heart. His loyalty, his unwavering belief in her, was a balm on her raw wound. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his soft hair, needing that simple, unconditional affection more than she could ever express. When she pulled back, Leo still looked troubled, as if something else was weighing heavily on his mind. He bit his lip. "There's something else." "Grandma," he said, his voice dropping to that hesitant whisper again. I have cameras. Hidden ones." Eleanor blinked, confused. "Cameras, darling? What kind of cameras? Remember the spy kit Dad gave me for Christmas?" Leo's eyes brightened slightly, a familiar childish excitement momentarily overcoming his sadness. "The one with the tiny cameras and listening devices? He said I could be a super spy, just like in the movies." Eleanor vaguely recalled the gift, one of Daniel's more extravagant and somewhat impractical presents. She had dismissed it as a child's toy, a fleeting fascination. She certainly never imagined it would become a key to unraveling a betrayal. "I hid them," Leo continued, his voice full of pride in his secret mission. "All over the house. Under the sofa, behind the books in Dad's office, even in the kitchen, behind the cereal box. I wanted to catch the tooth fairy, to see where she put the money." He paused, his expression turning serious again. "But then, sometimes, instead of the tooth fairy, I started hearing Mom and Dad say mean things." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Mean things. The casualness of the phrase, juxtaposed with the insidious nature of what he was implying, was terrifying. "What kind of mean things, Leo?" she asked, her voice barely audible, dread coiling in her stomach. Leo looked down at his hands. "Serena. She called you names. Really bad names. And Dad. Dad laughed. The revelation, delivered with such innocent candor, struck Eleanor like a thunderbolt. Daniel's laughter, that was the cruelest cut. It wasn't just Serena's malice. It was Daniel's complicity. His active participation in her degradation. Her son, her own flesh and blood, had found amusement in her being disparaged. Then Leo looked up again, his gaze unwavering. Serena said, "She said you were too stupid to know what they were doing to your money." The air left Eleanor's lungs in a silent gasp. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of cold, calculated deceit. Too stupid to know what they were doing to your money. The power of attorney. The closed accounts. The drained savings. It wasn't just an act of desperation. It was a premeditated robbery, executed with contempt and a chilling certainty of her ignorance. A new emotion, cold and resolute, began to settle in Eleanor's heart, slowly pushing aside the despair. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was anger, a righteous, simmering anger that promised retribution. "Leo," she said, her voice stronger now, a surprising clarity cutting through her shock. "Do you still have these recordings? Are they saved anywhere?" Leo nodded, his small face earnest. "Yes, Grandma. They're on my tablet. All of them." Eleanor's hands, still trembling, carefully took Leo's tablet. Her grandson, with a child's innocent yet precise movements, navigated to a folder labeled Secret Spy Missions. He tapped on a file marked Bedroom Cam, 3 weeks ago. The screen flickered, a grainy, slightly distorted image resolving into view. It was Daniel and Serena's bedroom. The angle was low, from what looked like under a dresser, capturing their feet pacing, their bodies occasionally cut off at the chest. Serena was clearly agitated, her shadow flitting across the wall as she moved. Her voice, though a little muffled, was sharp and clear. "I'm tired of pretending to like her." "Daniel," Serena spat, her voice laced with venom. She threw her hands up in exasperation. "The old bat follows me around like a lost puppy, trying to be helpful. It's suffocating." Eleanor watched, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. The words themselves were cruel, a stark contrast to the polite, even affectionate facade Serena had maintained for 18 months. But then, Daniel's figure moved into frame. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, a smirk playing on his lips. He threw his head back and laughed. Her son. Her own son. It was a sound that pierced Eleanor's heart, a chilling confirmation that the betrayal ran deeper, colder, than she had ever imagined. "Just a little longer, babe," Daniel said, his voice smooth, reassuring. He reached out and pulled Serena onto his lap. "Once we get everything transferred, we're out of here. You won't have to pretend anymore." His gaze seemed to fix on an unseen point beyond the camera's view, a calculating gleam in his eyes. "She trusts me completely. Always has. Mom's biggest weakness is that she loves me too much to see what's really happening." Eleanor flinched as if struck. Those words, delivered with such detached contempt, were a confirmation of her greatest fear. Her love had been weaponized against her. Her unwavering trust, a lifeline she had extended to her struggling son, had been twisted into a tool for her own financial ruin. The pain was not just from the betrayal, but from the realization of how utterly foolish and blind she had been. Leo, beside her, was silent, his small hand instinctively reaching for hers. Eleanor squeezed it, her gaze locked on the screen, a new resolve hardening her features. Leo then tapped another file. "This one's from your study, Grandma," he whispered, a hint of trepidation in his voice. The scene shifted. Now it was Eleanor's home office, a room she rarely used but kept meticulously organized. Serena was standing at the desk, illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. She was methodically photographing documents, snapping picture after picture. "Perfect," Serena murmured, a triumphant note in her voice. "This power of attorney thing was genius, baby." She signed it without even reading it properly. Then Daniel's voice, closer this time, dripping with contempt. "She'd sign her own death certificate, if I asked nicely enough." Eleanor felt a gasp catch in her throat. The words were so flippant, so utterly devoid of humanity, that they chilled her to the bone. To him, she was not a person, not his mother, but an obstacle, a means to an end, easily manipulated. This wasn't just neglect. It was calculated. Malicious intent. Leo, with another quick tap, brought up a third video, this one from just a few days ago. The camera was hidden behind the cereal boxes in the kitchen pantry. Serena was bustling around, humming a tune, clearly in a good mood. God, I hate her voice, Serena suddenly said, out of nowhere, referring to Eleanor's voice, which had probably been drifting in from the living room. Daniel entered the kitchen, his face breaking into a wide, approving smile. He didn't rebuke Serena. He endorsed her cruelty with his silent amusement. Your mom who's too dumb to realize we've been bleeding her dry for months, Serena continued, her voice rising in pitch, a giddy laugh escaping her lips. I can't wait until we're living it up while she's stuck in some cheap nursing home, wondering where all her money went. She laughed again. A harsh, grating sound that grated on Eleanor's nerves. The cheap ones, of course. She won't be able to afford anything better. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Nursing home. The casual way they discussed her future, casting her aside like an unwanted item, while planning to squander her life savings, the finality of it all, the complete disregard for her well-being, for her very existence. The video stopped. The screen went dark. The silence in the living room was profound, punctuated only by Eleanor's ragged breathing and Leo's soft sniffles. She no longer felt just pain or despair. A cold, hard certainty had settled deep within her. Daniel was not just complicit, he was an active, willing participant in this calculated, cold-hearted cruelty. He hadn't been coerced or manipulated by Serena. He had embraced her schemes, adding his own layer of contempt and mockery. She took a shaky breath, then looked at Leo, whose small face was streaked with tears. These recordings, Leo, she said, her voice steady, despite the turmoil raging inside her. They're very important. They prove that Mom and Dad did something very wrong. Leo looked up at her, his eyes wide, a flicker of understanding mixed with fear. Will they go to jail, Grandma? He asked, the innocence of the question a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. Eleanor paused. Jail. The word hung in the air, a heavy possibility. She thought of Daniel, her son, behind bars. The thought should have been horrifying, unimaginable, but then she remembered the images on the tablet. Daniel's laugh, his contempt, the cold calculation in his eyes. And she remembered Leo, abandoned, left to fend for himself. The anger, sharp and hot, resurfaced, hardening her heart. Her son had made his choice. Now, she would make hers. She pulled Leo close, wrapping her arms around his small, trembling body. I don't know. Sweet pea, she said, her voice firm, resolute. But what I do know is that they hurt us. They took everything. And they left you behind. She paused, then tightened her embrace, a fierce determination igniting within her. So, we're not just going to sit here and let them get away with it. We're going to fight back. You and me together. The scent of stale coffee and desperation still lingered faintly in Eleanor's kitchen, but now it mingled with the crisp, professional scent of Detective Laura Ramirez. The detective, a young woman with a sharp bob of dark hair and kind, yet no-nonsense eyes, sat at Eleanor's kitchen table. Leo's tablet, still displaying the grainy, incriminating footage, rested between them. Eleanor watched as the detective rewound a section, her brows furrowed in concentration, meticulously taking notes. This is remarkable, Mrs. Vance, Detective Ramirez said, finally looking up. Her voice was gentle but firm, carrying an underlying current of authority. The clarity of the audio, the details captured. This evidence is extremely compelling. She paused, her gaze softening slightly as she met Eleanor's eyes. Mrs. Vance, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain you want to pursue charges against your son? Cases involving family, especially those with such intimate betrayal, can be incredibly complicated, messy even. Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. The question had lingered in her own mind for a brief, agonizing moment. A whisper of the old Eleanor, the one who would have protected Daniel at all costs. But that Eleanor had died the moment she saw her son's contemptuous laugh on the screen, the moment she heard Serena mock her, the moment she realized Leo had been abandoned. "I'm certain, Detective," Eleanor stated, her voice steady, devoid of the tremor that had plagued her just days before. "What they did was theft. Plain and simple. The fact that Daniel is my son doesn't change that. In fact," she added, a note of pain creeping in, "it makes it worse." She explained how Daniel had presented the power of attorney form to her, casually mentioning it was just for emergencies. "Mom, in case something happens to you and you can't manage your own affairs?" She had signed it without a second thought, blinded by trust and the subtle fear of her own mortality. "He made it sound like he was protecting me," she finished, her voice laced with a bitter irony. Detective Ramirez nodded, her expression grim. She picked up a copy of the power of attorney document that Eleanor had managed to find among her papers. A document that had once felt so innocuous, now a symbol of her profound vulnerability. "This is a very broad power of attorney, Mrs. Vance," the detective observed, scanning the legal jargon. "It essentially gave him carte blanche over all your financial and legal matters. It even allowed him to liquidate assets and open new accounts in your name, or for your benefit, without your explicit, immediate consent for each transaction." Eleanor felt a flush of shame creep up her neck. "I know," she whispered, her gaze falling to her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "I should have read it. I trusted him." The admission was raw, a confession of her own naivety. "It's not your fault, Mrs. Vance," Detective Ramirez said, her voice surprisingly empathetic. "They preyed on that trust. This isn't just theft. This is what we call financial elder abuse. And with these recordings," she gestured to the tablet, "we have clear evidence of fraud and conspiracy. They didn't just take your money. They planned it, mocked you, and then abandoned their own child. This moves beyond a family dispute into serious criminal territory." At the mention of "catch them," Leo, who had been quietly coloring at the far end of the table, his head bowed over a drawing of a superhero, looked up. His eyes, still holding a hint of the trauma he had witnessed, searched the detective's face. "Are you going to catch them?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. Detective Ramirez offered him a kind, reassuring smile. "We are certainly going to try, buddy. It's our job to make sure people who do bad things are held accountable." Eleanor watched as a tiny flicker of relief, almost imperceptible, touched Leo's face. It cemented her decision. This wasn't just about her. It was about protecting Leo, about showing him that actions have consequences, that decency and justice still existed in a world that had suddenly turned so cruel. 2 days later, the phone rang, shattering the fragile peace Eleanor was trying to build for herself and Leo. She had spent the intervening time sorting through the fragments of her life, trying to find solutions for their immediate needs: a car, food, a sense of security. The unexpected ring made her jump. It was Detective Ramirez. "Mrs. Vance," she began, her voice calm and professional. Eleanor gripped the phone, her knuckles white. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Where?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Miami," the detective replied. "They were at a luxury resort, paying cash for everything. It seems they weren't being particularly subtle. Our intelligence indicated they might try to head south, and a sharp-eyed officer made the connection. They're in custody now, awaiting extradition back here." Eleanor slowly sank into the nearest kitchen chair, the news washing over her in a complex wave of emotions. Relief. Yes, a profound sense of it. That they wouldn't simply vanish into the ether. That justice, however painful, was within reach. But beneath the relief lay a heavy blanket of devastation. Miami. A luxury resort. Her money, her savings, Leo's college fund, being squandered on champagne and sun-drenched beaches while she sat in her empty home, wondering how to buy groceries. And then, the inescapable question, the one that gnawed at her soul. When? When had the sweet little boy she had raised, the one who used to leave her handmade cards and bring her wildflowers, turned into this man? This stranger, who could betray her so completely, who could abandon his own son, and laugh at her humiliation. The son she had sacrificed everything for, the one she had loved beyond measure. The weight of that unanswered question was almost unbearable, a sorrow deeper than any financial loss. If you're still with me after everything that's happened, thank you. This story is far from over, and it's about to get even more heartbreaking before it turns around. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a single part of this journey. Your support means the world to me. The courtroom was a sterile, impersonal space, filled with the hushed murmurs of onlookers and the low hum of air conditioning. Eleanor sat upright on a hard wooden bench. Mrs. Kim, her kind neighbor, a comforting presence beside her, holding her hand. Leo was safely at school, unaware of the grim proceedings his grandma was enduring on his behalf. Eleanor's heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread. She had thought herself ready, armored by the cold, hard facts of their betrayal. But nothing could truly prepare her for this. A side door opened, and a bailiff led Daniel into the courtroom. Eleanor's breath hitched. He was thinner, his face drawn, his usually perfectly styled hair now unkempt. The bright orange jumpsuit he wore was a stark, brutal contrast to the tailored shirts he had always favored. His eyes, when they finally met hers across the room, were empty, devoid of recognition, the eyes of a complete stranger. It was as if the son she had known, the boy she had loved and sacrificed for, had been utterly consumed, leaving behind only an unrecognizable shell. Then came Serena. Even in the drab jail clothes, she exuded a defiant aura. Her blonde hair, though a little flat, still looked intentionally styled, and a faint trace of makeup, likely applied with a practiced hand and limited resources, somehow managed to highlight her sharp cheekbones. Her gaze swept over the room, a smirk playing on her lips, settling on Eleanor with a look of pure contempt. The prosecutor, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit, rose and addressed the judge, her voice clear and resonant. Your Honor, the state charges Daniel Vance and Serena Vance with multiple counts, including but not limited to theft by taking, exploitation of an elderly person, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence will show a premeditated scheme to defraud Mrs. Eleanor Vance of her life savings and assets, leading to the abandonment of her minor grandson, Leo Vance, at school. Eleanor felt a grim satisfaction at hearing the charges articulated so precisely, so damningly. But that satisfaction was short-lived. Daniel's lawyer, a slick man with a perpetually apologetic expression, stood up. Your Honor, he began. My client wishes to make a statement before entering his plea. The judge, a formidable woman with keen eyes, nodded slowly. Vance, you may proceed. Daniel rose, his movements stiff and practiced. He turned, not towards the judge or the prosecutor, but directly towards Eleanor. His voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly steady, yet infused with a chilling bitterness. My mother was never a good parent. She was absent my entire childhood, always working, never there when I needed her. Eleanor gasped, a sharp, silent intake of air. The accusation struck her like a physical blow. Absent? She had worked 2, sometimes 3, jobs after her husband died to keep a roof over their heads, to put food on the table, to give Daniel every opportunity she could. She had been there. Always. Always, he continued, his voice gaining momentum, laced with a self-pity that twisted her gut. Everything I took, I earned through years of neglect and emotional abandonment. My entire life, I felt like a burden, not a son. That money wasn't theft. It was compensation. Compensation for a childhood I never had. The words echoed in the courtroom, each one a hammer blow to Eleanor's soul. She felt something inside her break completely, irrevocably. The possibility of ever reconnecting with him, of finding the boy she raised, shattered into 1,000 pieces. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was an assault on her very identity, her sacrifices, Her love. This was Daniel rewriting history, casting himself as the victim, and her, his mother, as the villain. The last vestiges of the son she knew, the one she had mourned, finally vanished, replaced by this cruel, manipulative stranger. The judge, however, seemed unimpressed by Daniel's theatrical performance. She leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Mr. Vance," she stated, her voice sharp. "This court understands that childhood grievances can be deeply personal. However, they do not, under any circumstances, negate charges of theft, fraud, and elder abuse. This is a court of law." Eleanor felt a faint surge of vindication. At least someone saw through his charade. "How do you plead to the charges, Mr. Vance?" the judge asked. Her tone brooks no further theatrics. "Not guilty," Daniel stated, his voice ringing with false righteousness. "And Miss Vance?" the judge asked Serena. Serena, still smirking, leaned into the microphone. "Not guilty," she echoed, her eyes fixing on Eleanor. Her lips moved, forming silent, chilling words that only Eleanor could read. "Stupid old woman." Mrs. Kim squeezed Eleanor's hand, offering a quiet, comforting pat on her back as the proceedings concluded, and Daniel and Serena were led away. "Don't listen to him, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice full of indignation. "You were a wonderful mother. We all saw it, but even Mrs. Kim's kind words couldn't erase the sting of Daniel's accusations." As Eleanor walked out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun feeling surprisingly harsh on her face, his words replayed in her mind, a relentless, insidious loop. Absent. Never there when I needed her. Compensation. Had she truly been that bad a mother? Had her desperate efforts to provide for him somehow translated into neglect in his eyes? The doubt, a poisonous seed, began to take root. That evening, the house felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. Eleanor sat on the sofa, lost in thought, the weight of Daniel's words pressing down on her. Leo, sensing her profound sadness, quietly approached her, a half-eaten snack bar in his hand. "Grandma?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. "Are you still sad about what Dad said?" Eleanor nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with unshed tears. "He said bad things," Leo said, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "Like Serena would say bad things. I heard her again on my videos, before they left." He hesitated, then continued, as if needing to purge the burden of his knowledge. She said, "She broke your favorite vase, the blue one, on purpose, and then she told Dad you had done it yourself because you were getting clumsy." Eleanor blinked, remembering the beautiful cobalt blue vase, a cherished gift from her late husband, that had mysteriously shattered last month. Serena had been so quick to comfort her, so apologetic about the accident. Another calculated lie. "And," Leo added, his voice dropping to a whisper, "Serena was really good at making Dad angry about stuff. She would say you were always messing things up. Or telling him what to do. She would twist things you did, Grandma, to make him mad." The pieces clicked into place, the escalating arguments between Daniel and her over trivial matters, the increasingly cold demeanor from her son, the subtle way Serena would always seem to be present, fanning the flames of disagreement. It wasn't just Daniel's innate cruelty, it was a sophisticated, insidious campaign of manipulation orchestrated by Serena, with Daniel as her willing pawn, or perhaps her enthusiastic partner. The last flicker of self-doubt extinguished, replaced by a cold, searing clarity. Daniel had chosen his path. He had chosen to be cruel, to be a thief, and to abandon his own son. He had chosen to rewrite their history with lies. But Eleanor would not let him. She would not let his twisted narrative rewrite the truth of her love, her sacrifices, or her enduring strength. She pulled Leo into a fierce hug, holding him close, feeling the warmth of his small body, the rhythmic beat of his heart against hers. This fight was no longer just for her money. It was for her truth, for Leo's future. And she would not back down. The legal process was moving forward, slow and ponderous, but moving nonetheless. Eleanor had spent the days since the arraignment in a haze of phone calls with Detective Ramirez, a new lawyer, and a social worker assigned to Leo. The bitter taste of Daniel's accusations still lingered, but the renewed resolve to fight back burned brighter. She was no longer just grieving. She was strategizing. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang, displaying Detective Ramirez's number. Eleanor answered, a familiar knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. Mrs. Vance. The detective's voice was crisp, almost triumphant. We have a crucial development regarding Serena. Her real name isn't Serena Vance, it's Teresa Reed. Eleanor felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Teresa Reed. The name clicked into place, not from a memory, but from a growing sense of dread. It felt sharper, somehow, more fitting for the woman who had orchestrated such cruel deceit. And her history is even more disturbing than we initially suspected, Detective Ramirez continued, her voice hardening. Teresa Reed has a pattern: 3 previous marriages, all to older men, all with significant assets. 2 ended in very messy divorces, with Teresa walking away with substantial settlements, and one husband died under suspicious circumstances. Nothing was proven, but the pattern is undeniable. She targets vulnerable men, isolates them, drains them, and then moves on. Eleanor listened, a dawning horror spreading through her. A serial manipulator. A predator. Teresa wasn't just Daniel's wife. She was a professional, a cold, calculating architect of financial ruin and emotional destruction. And Daniel, her son, had been her latest victim. Her 4th victim. The realization was sickening, a blend of anger and a strange, unwelcome pity for the man who had so readily thrown away his life and his family for such a person. We also managed to get into some of her old social media accounts, Detective Ramirez went on. She used them almost like a twisted diary, documenting her projects. That's what she called the men she targeted. And Daniel, Mrs. Vance, she called him Project Mama's Boy. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Project Mama's Boy. The contempt, the calculated nature of it all, was chilling. It wasn't just a spontaneous attraction, or even a mutual scam. It was a deliberate, long-term campaign. She meticulously detailed her plan, the detective explained, to isolate Daniel from you, to foster resentment, to slowly turn him against you. It seems this manipulation had been ongoing for at least 3 years, well before they even moved in with you. She specifically targeted him because of his close relationship with you, and because she knew about your financial security. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. 3 years. 3 years of subtle whispers, of carefully placed doubts, of insidious psychological warfare, all designed to chip away at the foundation of her relationship with her son. It explained so much. Daniel's growing distance, his sudden defensiveness, the way he would parrot Serena's opinions as his own. Detective Ramirez then sent a series of screenshots to Eleanor's phone. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened them. They were posts from what appeared to be a private social media account belonging to Teresa Reed. The first post, dated over 2 years ago, read, Project Mama's Boy is progressing nicely. He's starting to see Mommy Dearest as the obstacle she's always been. So easy to plant seeds of resentment when the ground is already fertile with perceived slights. Dan. Eleanor felt her stomach churn. Perceived slights. Daniel's accusations in court, his claims of neglect and abandonment, weren't just spur-of-the-moment lies. They were the meticulously cultivated fruits of Teresa's insidious labor. Another post, from closer to their arrival at Eleanor's home. Clark actually cried today, talking about how his mother never really loved him. 3 years of careful work paying off, almost ready for the harvest. Clark, Daniel's middle name. It hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. Teresa was gloating, detailing her triumph, celebrating the emotional destruction she had wrought. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about breaking people, about proving her perverse control. Leo, who had been quietly playing with his toy cars on the floor, had noticed his grandmother's distress. He abandoned his cars and came to sit beside her, peering over her shoulder at the phone screen. His young eyes, surprisingly sharp, scanned the words. "Grandma?" he asked, his voice puzzled. "What's subtle programming?" Eleanor looked at him, her heart aching. How could she explain such darkness to a child? It's like tricking someone's mind. "Sweet pea," she explained, choosing her words carefully, making them believe things that aren't true, without them even realizing it. Leo nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in thought. "I heard her say that to Dad sometimes," he confided. Teresa. She would tell him you were trying to control him." Eleanor closed her eyes, a vivid mosaic of memories flashing before her. The seemingly innocent comments from Teresa, the casual observations that had always seemed to plant a seed of irritation in Daniel. She would twist things, Leo continued, his voice echoing Eleanor's own thoughts. Like, "Remember when you asked Dad to fix the garage door because it was squeaky? Teresa said you were treating him like a handyman, not your son, and that you were too selfish to just call someone else." Eleanor remembered. Daniel had been furious, accusing her of exploiting him. "And when you knit him that sweater for his birthday?" Leo went on, recalling details with chilling precision. "She told him it was old-fashioned, and you were trying to make him feel like a child, and that you didn't respect him as a grown-up." The beautiful, hand-knitted merino wool sweater, a labor of love, had vanished shortly after Daniel's birthday. She had assumed he had simply outgrown it or lost it, but now she realized it had been another casualty of Teresa's manipulation. "Even when you asked them for dinner, just for a normal dinner," Leo added, his voice tinged with the sadness of a child remembering lost family harmony. "She told him you were trying to check up on him, or that you thought he couldn't take care of himself. She said you wanted to control his whole life." Eleanor listened, each of Leo's innocent recollections painting an even more horrifying picture of Teresa's systematic dismantling of her family. It wasn't just the money. It was the calculated destruction of the bond between a mother and her son, built on years of love and sacrifice. It was an assault on her very essence. The anger, cold and steady, solidified into an unbreakable resolve. Teresa Reed had played a dangerous game, preying on vulnerabilities, twisting truths. But she had underestimated Eleanor Vance, and she had certainly underestimated the power of a grandson's hidden cameras. The phone call from Detective Ramirez came as a surprise. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice neutral. "Your son, Daniel, has requested to see you. He states he has something important to tell you. It's entirely your decision, of course, but it might be illuminating." Eleanor hesitated. See Daniel? After the vitriol he had spewed in court, the accusations that had twisted her heart into knots, the thought of facing him again, especially within the stark walls of a jail, filled her with a potent mix of dread and a faint, persistent curiosity. What could he possibly want to say? Was it another attempt at manipulation? Or was there a sliver of the son she knew, yearning to break free from the web of deceit? She took a deep breath. She had to know. For Leo, if not for herself, the small visiting room at the jail was as grim and uninviting as she had imagined. A scratched metal table separated two uncomfortable plastic chairs. The air was cold, impersonal, heavy with unspoken stories. When Daniel was led in, the clink of his handcuffs, a jarring punctuation in the silence, Eleanor's heart gave a painful lurch. He looked even worse than he had in court. His face was pale, his eyes hollow and red-rimmed, haunted. The bravado he had displayed at the arraignment was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. For a long moment, they simply sat and stared at each other, the echoes of their shared past and the chasm of their present hanging between them. Finally, Daniel broke the silence, his voice raspy, barely above a whisper. "Mom," he started, then faltered, his gaze falling to the table. "My lawyer. He showed me some things. About Serena. About her past. The other husbands." He trailed off, the words seemingly catching in his throat. Eleanor felt a cold satisfaction. So, the truth was finally reaching him. She pulled out her phone, navigated to the screenshots Detective Ramirez had sent, and slid it across the table. "Her name is Teresa Reed," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "And this is what she calls her projects." Daniel picked up the phone, his hands trembling slightly. His eyes widened as he read the posts, his face transforming through a gamut of emotions: disbelief, then horror, and finally, a profound, agonizing grief. He saw Project Mama's boy, the casual cruelty of it, the cold calculation. He saw the glee in Clark, actually cried today. His middle name, a final, undeniable confirmation of his unwitting role in her game. He crumpled inward, pressing the phone to his chest, his shoulders shaking. "She said I was her fourth victim," he whispered, the words barely audible, choked with despair. "That I was the easiest one yet, because I was so desperate for approval." Eleanor watched him, her own heart a complex mix of emotions. Anger still simmered, but beneath it, a sliver of the old maternal instinct, a deep-seated pain for the lost boy, began to surface. He looked so utterly broken, so completely undone. "I was desperate, Mom," Daniel confessed, finally looking up, tears streaming down his face. His voice cracked with raw emotion. "I always felt like I wasn't good enough, like I was constantly failing you, failing Dad's memory. When Serena came along, she saw all those insecurities. And when she told me that you were the problem, that you were holding me back, that you didn't understand me, it felt like someone finally understood." He buried his face in his hands, his body racked with sobs. "She twisted everything. Mom, everything you did, everything you said. She made me believe you hated me, that you wanted to control me. And I fell for it." Eleanor reached across the cold metal table, her hand hesitantly resting on his. It was the first physical contact they had made in what felt like an eternity. His skin was cold, clammy. "She manipulated you, Daniel," Eleanor said, her voice softer than she had intended, but firm in its truth. "That much is clear. She preyed on your insecurities, on your feelings of inadequacy." She paused, pulling her hand back, reminding herself of his active choices. "But I didn't steal that money. Daniel. You did. I didn't leave Leo at school, knowing he would be alone. You did. She may have planted the ideas, but you chose to believe her. You chose to take that money. You chose to abandon your son." Daniel looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his face a mask of anguish. "I know," he choked out, his voice thick with tears. "God, I know. Even if she planted the ideas, I'm the one who acted on them. I'm the one who did all those things." The self-loathing in his voice was palpable. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to sort through the chaos of her emotions. "That doesn't excuse what you did, Daniel," she said, her voice firm once more. "It doesn't make any of it right. But it helps me understand why you did it." She looked at him, truly looked at the broken man before her, and felt a flicker of the love she had once held so fiercely. "I still love the boy you were, Daniel, the son I raised, but the man you became. You don't deserve my forgiveness." "Not yet." A fresh wave of tears racked his body, but through them, a different kind of resolve seemed to solidify in his eyes. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I want to make it right, Mom," he declared, his voice gaining a desperate urgency. "I want to tell the truth about Serena, about Teresa, about everything. I want to help get your money back. I want to tell the police everything. I want to help put her away." Eleanor searched his face. He seemed truly remorseful, truly broken. But was it genuine? Or another manipulation? Then she remembered Teresa's social media posts, her boast about him being a mama's boy, the easiest victim. And a thought sparked. "Serena still thinks I'm her devoted puppet," Daniel said, almost to himself, a bitter laugh escaping him. "She has no idea I know any of this. She thinks I'm still completely under her spell." A flicker of determination, cold and calculating, appeared in Daniel's eyes. It wasn't the Daniel she had known, but it was a man who, perhaps, could still be useful, a tool, just as he had been a tool for Teresa. Eleanor saw it, and a plan, both daring and dangerous, began to form in her mind. This was not about forgiveness. This was about justice. The plan was audacious, risky, and, Eleanor knew, utterly necessary. Detective Ramirez laid it out in the sterile confines of her office. "We want to wire Daniel," she explained, her gaze direct, "and have him confront Teresa. We need her to admit to the conspiracy, to her role in manipulating him, and explicitly link it to the theft. Her ego is her greatest weakness. She'll want to boast, to take credit." Eleanor felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Daniel? Wired? Facing Teresa, who still believed him to be her devoted puppet. It was a dangerous gamble, but the potential payoff. Teresa's full confession was too significant to ignore. The wait during the meeting was agonizing. Eleanor sat in a small observation room at the police station, staring at a static image on a monitor, listening to the crackle of a hidden microphone. Every second stretched into an eternity. She imagined Teresa's sharp eyes, her cunning mind, her ability to twist words. Would Daniel hold up? Would Teresa see through it? Finally, after what felt like an age, Detective Ramirez's voice came through the comms. "We got it all, Mrs. Vance. Everything we needed." It was perfect. A wave of profound relief washed over Eleanor, so intense it almost made her dizzy. She sank back into her chair, closing her eyes, a silent prayer of thanks escaping her lips. Later, Eleanor sat in a soundproof room, headphones clamped over her ears, listening to the recording. Daniel's voice, tentative at first, then gaining strength, filled her ears. "Teresa," he began, "who is Patricia Winters? And what did you mean by Project Mama's Boy?" There was a moment of silence. Then Teresa's voice, initially sweet, almost playful, began to shift. "Oh, Daniel," she purred, a hint of steel beneath the sugar. "Did Mama finally tell you about my little game?" As Daniel pressed her, revealing the screenshots Eleanor had shown him, the sweetness vanished entirely. Teresa's voice turned cold, calculating, devoid of any pretense of affection. "So, Mama's boy finally grew a backbone," she sneered, a harsh laugh following. "Took you long enough. Honestly, I just helped you see what was already there, Daniel. All those resentments, all that anger at your pathetic little life. I just gave it direction." Eleanor's grip tightened on the armrests of her chair. The casual cruelty, the utter lack of remorse, was chilling. "And Leo?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking slightly. Teresa scoffed. "Please. The kid was just part of the cover story. A way to get closer to your mother and her money. Did you really think I wanted to be tied down with some boring man-child and his brat forever? He was an inconvenience, honestly. Such a loud little thing." Eleanor flinched as if Teresa had slapped her. The venom directed at Leo, her innocent grandson, was a fresh wound. "You agreed to leave him, Daniel," Teresa continued, her voice dripping with scorn, without even hesitating. "That's on you, not me. I just pointed out how much easier our grand escape would be without a crying child in tow. You bought it hook, line, and sinker." The recording continued, a horrifying testament to Teresa's manipulative genius and Daniel's utter complicity. She openly boasted, "The money was always the point, darling. What else is there? But watching you turn against your dear old mother, watching her face crumble as you threw all those manufactured accusations at her, that was more entertaining than I expected. A bonus, really." She detailed her masterpiece, her 2-year plan to systematically turn Daniel against Eleanor, twisting every innocent interaction into a perceived slight. Your mother's requests for help, her attempts to connect, her little gifts. Teresa purred, her voice thick with self-admiration. All of it reframed as her trying to control you, to keep you small. And you, dear Daniel, you ate it up. Then came the final, brutal confirmation. "The power of attorney," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "Was that your idea too?" Teresa laughed, a chilling, triumphant sound. "Of course. I subtly planted the idea, let you think it was your own clever solution. Honestly, Daniel, you haven't had an original thought about your mother in 3 years. You were just a puppet, and I was the master. Eleanor slowly took off the headphones, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. Her hands were shaking, her body stiff with a cold fury. The truth, in its rawest, most unvarnished form, was even more horrifying than she had imagined. Theresa Reed was a monster, and Daniel, her son, had been her willing accomplice. A victim of his own insecurities, yes, but still responsible for his choices. Detective Ramirez re-entered the room, her expression grim but resolute. "That's everything we need, Mrs. Vance," she said. "Theresa Reed, or Serena, is facing a very long time in prison. The video evidence, combined with this recording, is ironclad. And Daniel's cooperation will significantly help his case. He'll still face consequences, but the prosecutor can now differentiate between the mastermind and the manipulated party." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak, her mind still reeling from the venom of Theresa's words. "One more thing, Mrs. Vance," Detective Ramirez said, placing a folded piece of paper on the table. "Daniel asked me to give you this." Eleanor picked up the letter. It was in Daniel's familiar handwriting. She opened it, her eyes scanning the words, each one a painstaking attempt at remorse. "Mom," it read, "I've heard it all now. Every cruel word, every twisted lie. I see it. I see how deeply I was manipulated, how utterly I was broken. But I also see my own choices, my own failures. There are no excuses for what I did, for the pain I caused you, for abandoning Leo. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm just asking for the chance to spend the rest of my life trying to become the son you deserved and the father Leo deserves. I know it's a long road, but for the first time in a long time, I want to walk it." Eleanor clutched the letter, her vision blurring. Forgiveness. It was a word that felt impossibly distant, perhaps even undeserved by Daniel. But a chance? A chance to become the son she deserved? The possibility, however faint, sparked a flicker of hope in her weary heart. The journey ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of light at the end of the very dark tunnel. 18 months later, the morning sun streamed into Eleanor's new apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and highlighting the vibrant colors of Leo's drawings taped to the refrigerator. The old house, with its ghost of betrayal and years of cherished memories, had been sold. This new space, smaller but filled with a quiet sense of peace, felt like a fresh canvas. The scent of maple syrup and butter filled the air as Eleanor flipped pancakes on the griddle, a comfortable domestic rhythm that was once again hers. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, a faint smile touching her lips. It was a text from Daniel, sent from the minimum security facility, where he was serving his reduced sentence. It was the anniversary of that devastating day, the day her world had crumbled. His text was simple, heartfelt. "Thinking of you today, Mom. So sorry for everything. Still working to make it right." Eleanor didn't text back immediately. She didn't need to. Their communication, once a battlefield, was now a cautious, steady rebuilding. Letters, supervised phone calls, occasional texts. Each one a small step on a very long road towards mending a broken bond. Forgiveness wasn't a switch she could simply flip, but understanding had begun to bloom, nurtured by Daniel's consistent remorse and active efforts to atone. Theresa Reed's trial had been swift and decisive. Her charm, her arrogance, had failed her in the cold light of the courtroom. Faced with Leo's videos, Daniel's testimony, and the mountain of evidence Detective Ramirez had amassed, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts: elder fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and theft. Theresa, still defiant, had mouthed, "This isn't over," at Eleanor as she was led away, but Eleanor felt a profound sense of completion. For her, it was finally over. Theresa was sentenced to 12 years in state prison. "Grandma?" Leo's voice broke her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. He bounced into the kitchen, his eyes bright with anticipation. Is Dad coming this weekend? For his supervised visit? Eleanor smiled, pouring a stack of golden pancakes onto a plate. Yes, sweet pea. He'll be here Saturday morning. Their visits, initially stiff and awkward, had gradually softened. Daniel was genuinely trying. He read stories to Leo, helped with homework over video calls, and patiently answered all of Leo's questions. He had promised Leo, fiercely and unequivocally, that he would never abandon him again. And for the first time in a long time, Leo was beginning to believe him. Daniel was learning to be a father, something he had never truly been, but was now desperately striving for. The doorbell chimed. Eleanor wiped her hands on a towel and answered it. Standing on her doorstep was a poised woman with intelligent, curious eyes. Mrs. Vance? Emily Price, investigative journalist from the Times. Eleanor invited her in. Emily explained, "Your case, Mrs. Vance." It resonated. After your story started making headlines, 3 other victims of Teresa Reed came forward. Men, older men, just like Daniel, who had been targeted and stripped of their assets. Your courage gave them the strength to speak out, to prosecute their own family members who were also manipulated. A surprising warmth spread through Eleanor. Her pain, her fight, had not been in vain. It had sparked a ripple effect, bringing justice to others. She agreed to share her story on the condition that Leo's privacy remained paramount, and that Daniel was portrayed accurately. A victim of Teresa's manipulation, yes, but also a perpetrator who had to face the consequences of his actions. As Emily meticulously took notes, Eleanor found herself speaking with a newfound clarity and conviction. "Do you regret pressing charges against your son?" Emily asked, her pen poised. Eleanor met her gaze, a deep sense of peace settling over her. "I regret that it was necessary," she said, her voice strong and steady. "I regret that my son allowed himself to be led down such a dark path. But I don't regret holding him accountable. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most loving thing I could do for both of us. It stopped the cycle. It forced him to see the truth, to take responsibility. It forced me to stand up for myself, for Leo." Later that day, after Emily had left, Eleanor picked up her phone and sent a text to Daniel. "I'll never give up on you, son," she typed. "But I'll also never again put your needs above my own well-being, or Leo's. That's what love looks like now." A moment later, his reply came. "I understand, Mom, and I agree. Thank you." A few weeks later, a letter arrived, carefully hand-addressed. It was from one of Teresa Reed's other victims, a man named Arthur, who had lost his life savings. He wrote, "Your story, Mrs. Vance, gave me the courage to see the truth, to fight for myself. You are a true inspiration, and you saved me, and others, from further despair." Eleanor held the letter, her eyes welling with tears, not of sadness, but of profound understanding. She called Daniel later that evening. "Did you hear about Teresa's other victims?" she asked him. "Yes, Mom," he replied, his voice soft. "Detective Ramirez told me. I'm proud of you, Mom. For fighting back, for protecting Leo, for showing everyone that even when family hurts you, you can still stand up for what's right." Eleanor smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. Her life was not what it once was, nor was it what she had envisioned. But it was honest. It was built on resilience, on earned trust, and on a deep, abiding love that had been tested in the fires of betrayal and emerged, stronger and truer. She had learned to choose herself, to define her own worth, and in doing so, had found an inner strength she never knew she possessed. Teresa Reed's failure had, in its own twisted way, taught them all the true meaning of love.